I'm Mary Lyons, and I am the Wealth Woman.
And I'm Eric Alexander from Benchmark Income Group.
And this is the Big Wealth Podcast.
Everything you've ever been taught about money is wrong.
But don't worry, we're here to help.
On this podcast, we'll use the same tools you already know to actually help set you free.
Free to do what you want with your time, with your money, and with your energy. Free to live your life the way you have dreamt about.
So we're going to talk about wealth knowledge, personal reflections, and the financial industry news of the day.
Welcome to the Big Wealth Podcast. Today we're going to talk about a myth that probably most of you have heard, and it is really looking at advice that is given kind of carte blanche blanket statements and how they might actually affect you, because sometimes you hear something enough times, you assume that that is what you should be doing, that enough people say it, it must be true. And we are here to question some of that for you. So what we want to talk about today is the idea that everyone should max out their 401k. Eric, I mean, people come in all the time thinking I should be doing that, right? I mean,
right. Well, it's the foregone conclusion. It's like, okay, here's where I am. And I did all the right stuff. Now I'm just on to the what else can I do, right?
Right. And so we see people maxing out 401ks all the time. And sometimes that makes sense, but sometimes it doesn't. I think the easiest way to think about this, and I'm going to talk specifically to the dollars that are not receiving a match from your employer. So this is specific to someone who is overfunding above and beyond what's being matched, or someone who is putting into a 401k that is not being matched at all, or even potentially the business owner themselves, so that if they are putting in the money, the match is also coming from them. So this is to that. If you are getting a match, that's free money. There's no reason you should ever turn that down, right? But if you're not, if you're not, then there's a different way to think about this. I think what happens to people, and Eric, I mean, we talk about this all the time, but I think part of what happens to people is that they get into it, and I hear people say, you know, I feel like I'm good at making money and not great about making decisions with it afterwards. And I think sometimes people begin questioning their own savvy just because of a misunderstanding or the way something is being taught. So we're going to reframe this. So forget money for a second. I've got a business deal for you. Here's how it's going to work. Eric, you're going to put in all the money to launch a company with me. You're going to put in all the money. And on the day-to-day management of the business, I'm going to be MIA. You're never going to see me. You are responsible for all the day-to-day management of this business. And when the business is not doing well, you're going to be the one staying up at night, freaking out, trying to figure out how you're going to get this back on track. And in 20 years, I'm going to come back to you and I'm going to tell you how much of this business belongs to me. Do you want to go into business with me?
Not only no. Right.
Right. There's no way you would do that. Right. I mean, we don't have to think about that for very long to know that this is a terrible deal. And yet when you think about what's happening with the unmatched dollars of your 401k, right? Who's putting in all the money?
Right. Yeah.
Who's responsible for the day-to-day management, really the performance? And if there's a huge market correction, who's staying up at night freaking out about how they're going to get their retirement back on track? And at the end of the day, the IRS gets to tell you what percentage of your overall balance is going to go to them in the form of taxes. So that could be the tax rate we see today. It could be a much higher tax rate. If you get lucky, it could be a lower tax rate, although historically, that is a little more rare when you look at a tax history.
Could be a gamble.
It could be, right? And so when you really think about the decision that's being made in context of business, it's a decision that most people would never consider, right? They'd rule it out. And yet it is a decision that a lot of people make when they are talking about money. And Eric, you have a great analogy too, right? It's the farming analogy.
Right. Yeah. Well, and if you think about it, you want your money at interest, and so does the government. right? So you
Sure.
you pay tax, right? The government is giving you a break on the tax at the beginning. And
Right.
so what the farmer would call the seed, and then you want that harvest, you want that seed to grow to a very big harvest. So you're getting a tax break on the seed, and they're waiting until your money gets really, really big and you get taxed on the harvest, not the seed. And so it, whether you look at it from the standpoint of the business owner sort of story or the seed versus harvest, it's a really, when you finally kind of think through it and kind of think through what's going on, it's not always the easy, it's not always the obvious choice, right? It's the
Right.
easy choice because everybody does it and everybody says, well, just put in your 19.5 or whatever the max is from the IRS at that year, right? Put in your money, get the match, and go on.
Right.
But it doesn't always make the most sense. And
Right.
the other half of that, not sorry, not to interrupt, but the
No,
other
no,
half on
go.
that I really kind of keep thinking through is, if I think about my earning years, are also the years where I've got the heaviest burden on all my other expenses. I've got a mortgage, I've got kids, I'm trying to go contribute to charity. Right? There's lots of things that need my money, want my money.
Mhm.
All of those things that want my money also look like tax deductions. Like I've got
Right.
two-legged tax deductions walking around my house, eating all my food, right? And the
Right.
mortgage company, I get to write off some of that. And so when I think about the tax that I'm going to pay on the seed, even then it's a little bit smaller because the tax that I'm going to pay, I get to write off some of that, right? I mean, there's
Right.
some write-offs that I get on that. But if I think through 30 years from now, 40 years from now, hopefully the mortgage is paid off. Hopefully the kids are out of the house. It's failure to launch moments there, but hopefully the kids are out of the house. And I may be doing less as far as business deductions and other things. And so
Right.
not only am I paying tax on the harvest, I'm paying the tax on the harvest, and I probably have fewer deductions to eat away at that burden.
So let's talk for a minute about why people say to max out your 401k. There is a common assumption, and we hear this from people that we're talking to on a regular basis, especially in early meetings. And the common conception is, well, I'm going to have less income in retirement. And I think this sort of automatic buy-in to the idea that you will have less when you retire speaks to probably a bigger problem, but it's not necessarily true either. Because in an ideal world, as advisors, we should be creating this sort of levelization so that the lifestyle that you're living today, based on the income that you're making today, doesn't change just because you retire. So you don't want to necessarily save so much that when you retire, you get a huge raise, but you also don't want to save so little that when you retire, your income goes down. There's sort of magic, I guess, in consistency and efficiency that if you build the financial plan correctly, you should be able to maintain your lifestyle, even adjusted for inflation. And that's where I think when you start looking at it, this idea that, oh, well, I'll be in a lower bracket later may not be accurate. So who should be considering a 401k? I think if you're someone who is relatively close to retirement, and based on the amount that you already have saved, you know you're going to have an income shortfall, then I think a deferral makes a lot of sense, because instead
Sure.
of paying the taxes at a higher income bracket today, you'll be paying them hopefully at a lower bracket in the future. But for somebody who is younger or who has done a tremendous job saving, where they're going to have the same income or higher, I think there's actually a fairly substantial risk from a tax perspective. So Eric, will you talk a little bit about tax history in the United States?
Yeah, sure. Well, and the tax history is sort of interesting, and it's not the full story. So I think we'll talk about that, which I think is we'll kind of cover some of those pieces. But if you look at, I think the average tax rate from, what was it, 2000? No, not 2000, 1907. From the very moment there was a tax bracket, right? Up until now, the average tax rate was right around 65% for the highest marginal tax bracket, was right around 65%. And what a lot of people don't know is that right at the end of 1941, beginning of 1942, there was a little known event called World War II, and the marginal tax rate jumped to 90 to 94% for everybody making, I think it was above $1 million at that time.
So I think the numbers are actually in the 80s. So, and I just was looking at this chart yesterday. So you're right, because after World War II, yes, it jumps into the 90s, but there was sort of this pivotal moment. And granted, these are not inflation adjusted numbers, but at some point prior to World War II, if you were making more than $5 million, your tax rate was 80, 81%, somewhere in the 80s. And then the very next year, somebody making over 200 became eligible. And so while again, that may not have been a very large portion of the population at that time, I think what's really nutty about it is here you have a large group of people thinking like, oh, I'm good, this doesn't apply to me. And then all of a sudden the next year, their reality is incredibly different. And so historically, I think actually now with the newest data, because we've been in a very low environment, that if you look at the highest marginal brackets, it's somewhere between 57 and 60. So we've seen that scoot down over the past couple of years.
Nice.
But the idea that there was over a decade in the United States where the highest marginal tax bracket was above 90% is crazy, because if you think about where the highest marginal bracket is today, it's lower than the average. And so in a situation where maybe you fall into that highest bracket and you're, in above 60% is going to taxes, it totally makes sense to defer as much as you can. But if we're below the average and we're in a historically low tax rate environment, even though it feels so difficult to write the check for those taxes if you're writing it yourself. The risk is that if you stay at the same income level or the same arena, that there is the potential that you will end up in a substantially higher bracket whenever you're taking income in the future.
Well, and that history, I think, teaches us two things on that side though, too, is it's not just the rate. It's not just whether it's 32% or 20% or 65%. The thing that can change overnight, and neither of those you get a vote on. And the OCD part of my personality is like, yeah, I don't know that, right? I want all the votes. It's not just the rate, it's what do you have to earn to qualify to be in that bracket? I mean, if it was $5 million or $2 million, whatever the number was in the 40s, when that was the highest bracket, and then magically overnight, it went from $5 million to 200K.
Right.
That introduced a whole swath of people, to your point, that never would have thought that they would have had that problem. And you didn't get a vote on it, but you were drastically affected by that the next day, right? And that was sort of the famous story that Reagan was the first actor, I think, in that time period, the first actor to make $1 million.
On the movie Bedtime for Bonzo, which I don't think is culturally significant in any way other than he was the first person to gross over $1 million for a single film.
And I think the number was he had to pay 90% of that, right? So, I mean, he made $1 million and got to keep 100K of it. And so because of that, it changes a lot of behavior. Why would I go out and work for all this money when I get to keep a tenth of it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if I get to keep 10 cents for every dollar that I earn, I'm done for the year. I'll be in Mexico on a beach enjoying the sunshine.
Right. And the other part of it, and I'm going to be really, really careful to stay out of politics because I really don't want to go there. But I mean, it paints the landscape. Is if I look at not just the marginal bracket, but who's actually paying the bulk of the taxes.
Right.
I think right now, 97% of the taxes are paid by roughly 50% of the population.
Correct.
It means the other 50% of the population is on a net basis not really paying any taxes. And so as we continue to sort of increase the deficit spending, then that top 50% has a larger and larger target on their back because the money has to come from somewhere.
Right. And I want to speak to the politics part for just a second too, because in conveying this information, it's not to convince you whether the beliefs that you hold about money are, the right ones or not. Absolutely. Politically. It's just to make sure that you understand what the landscape is so that as you're making decisions, you can think not only about how these decisions may affect you and also about how they may affect other people. Because some people listening to this may say, oh my gosh, I don't want to pay any of that. I need to find a strategy to deal with it. And other people may be of the feeling of like, yeah, I should be paying that because I need to do all these other things. And so regardless of the feeling, I think the context is so helpful, because if you know what is happening, it becomes pretty easy to make good decisions. But if you don't understand the context, I think it becomes much harder. And I can say, we have some software that shows the tax history that we get into sometimes with clients. And there have been times, even working with licensed CPAs, that when I show them the tax history for the United States, it's the first time they've ever seen it. And so I think too, it's helpful to understand the context of the advice you're getting, because if you think about what a CPA is measured on, it's how much money did I, and I'm going to use air quotes, save you in taxes. And sometime for this year, right? For this specific year. And so if you are, there are times that you're really saving money, but there are also times that you are just deferring when you are paying those dollars. And so you need to be really clear on, am I actually saving this? This is money that I am never going to have to pay in taxes, because that means you saved that money. Or is this money that I'm not paying today, but I'm setting myself up to pay it at an unknown rate in the future? Right. And that's where I think the context is so key, because the difference between that advice and the advice that you and I give, Eric, is that our job and what we're measured on is wealth over a lifetime. Right. Correct. And so those goals are very different. And so the advice frequently is very different. And that's where I think it's so key to understand, what is this person measured on, and how does this advice actually impact me? Right. And so, I don't want to knock CPAs, because good gracious, I could not live my life without mine.
Yeah, no
but when it comes down to it, you need to make sure you understand how that advice is truly impacting you, not just on a surface level. You've got to do the second layer of analysis.
Yeah. I mean, and that's when I don't know if it's the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse is one of them, is tax, but it's right up there, right? I mean, it's because it's such a big deal. And I think that 4 horsemen of the apocalypse concept really deals with taxes, health, technology shifts. I mean, it's all of these things that you don't control is why they're so potentially devastating for you, right? If you get sick and die early, or if you get sick and don't die, but you're disabled, I mean, that's a major thing that you don't control that can affect your future. And it really is that idea of, it's not just affecting your day to day right now, but it's affecting your ability to generate wealth and income for potentially a generation or two. Right. And that's where that issue on tax comes in, is that if it really is that hit, if it really goes from 5% today to 94% tomorrow, right? That's not a minor deal, and it's something that could dramatically affect you, and you don't control that much.
Yeah. And I want to be kind of clear here on 2 things. So we are not tax professionals. So if you have questions about your specific situation, you need to make sure that you are talking to your CPA about the ramifications of the choices that you're making, right? We can give you the growth context, but when it comes to your taxes, that is not our area of expertise. You need to be talking to your CPA about that. But I also think the second part about this is that we're not anti-401k. If I think about the beauty of the 401k, it's automatic. So especially for people who have a tendency to spend everything that is in their checking account, it's nice to have it never hit your checking account, because it's automatic and it just goes directly there. Right. And then for people who have a tendency to maybe dip into their liquidity and I'm going to, again, use air quotes, a one-time basis, but really that one-time basis happens all the time. Having it somewhere where it's not quite so easily accessible, or there's penalties for taking the money out, might actually help from a discipline perspective. So it really comes down to knowing yourself. And I'll even say that sometimes when we're talking to clients who are looking for ways to increase what they're saving without feeling a sense of deprivation in their lifestyle, we'll encourage them to increase their 401k by 1% every year until they are maxing it out, because it's an easy way for them to get used to the savings. And then it has, once you're saving it, the conversation then can become, is this really the most efficient place that I can put the money, given that the goal I have is to maximize my income whenever I'm ready to retire? And then that's a different conversation. But I think developing the good saving habits is really probably the most important part. And then figuring out where to put it is key, which is an interesting thing to say, because the reality is people want to ask us, how much money should I save?
Right.
And then where should I put it? And the true answer is where you're putting it determines how much you should be saving because of both the growth rate and the distribution rate. So on that note, I want to thank you guys for being with us today.
Yeah,
if you have more questions about 401ks and whether or not you specifically should be doing that, if it's the best place for you to grow your money, feel free to reach out to us over DM. You can find me. I'm on Instagram and Facebook. My handle is @TheWealthWoman. Eric, how can they find you?
Same location, Facebook and Instagram. Economics. Boy, I butchered that one. Economics.
Economics. Oh, why did you not do that?
That's a whole nother podcast right there. Economics. There you go. Thanks, Mary.
All right. Have a good one. We'll see y'all soon.